you for rating and reviewing us on iTunes. Thank you for supporting us at patreon.com/Matt Lewis. And I am excited to have today's guest, Batya Ungar-Sargon. She's a deputy opinion editor at Newsweek and the author of a brand new book out right now called Bad News: How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy. Batya Ungar-Sargon, welcome to the news.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is great to talk with you, and I obviously want to really spend a lot of time on the book and on the thesis of the book. But talk a little bit about you, because people may think that you have a right-wing background or something, but actually that's far from the truth.
Yes, I am a lefty. I am a left-wing populist. I consider myself a socialist, although I think probably the way I define it is maybe a little bit different from the way others might. I believe that the government's job should be to ensure a job for every person. I think the government should be deeply involved in protecting working class jobs and ensuring that the working class has dignity and is woven into the fabric of American society at a very deep level. And so as you can probably imagine, I think the government's doing a very bad job of doing all of that. But yeah, my book is a critique of liberalism from the left, from the populist left. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that.
Oh, sure thing. And look, I think it's very interesting because there are people on the left who I think don't really care that much about America. They think America is inherently an evil, bad place and they want to destroy it. And then there are people on the left that I just happen to have a different worldview than, but they're patriotic, good Americans. They just think that they have a different solution than I do. But we're seeing that people like me, maybe we didn't notice the distinction before, but now I think it's becoming very clear.
Well, you know what's interesting is I used to be in the liberal side that I now criticize. I used to be very woke. And I remember during the Bernie Hillary campaign, I was very much in the Hillary camp. And um, now looking back, I think the campaign that Bernie ran on in 2015 was actually very anti woke, very class based, very focused on kitchen table issues, and very unifying from a political polarization point of view. There were a lot of Bernie Trump people actually. And it was very funny and almost sad to see in 2019, 2020, how Bernie became a lot more woke, started using this very specialized academic language to talk about things like intersectionality and things that are very alien to the working class on both sides of the political aisle, very alien to working class voters of color. So that divide was there. And then the divide kind of disappeared because I guess Bernie felt that he couldn't run against Trump on just the class-based issues, which was kind of sad because maybe he would have won. But so it's funny that you say that you see this divide reemerging. I mean, I hope that that's true. I often feel like so much of the class-based left has gotten subsumed under this re-racialization of American life that I find to be very ugly and condescending and problematic, and an abandonment of working class people of color. So I'm glad you're seeing it. I hope to see more of it.
And you make an interesting point, right? That it's actually a lot of working class minorities are not woke. They are more conservative in many ways, and often it is young white people, young white progressives on Twitter who are really advancing the most radical left wing. And it's also, I mean, part of the problem too is, like Bernie, like I'm not really into class warfare, but the good thing about class warfare is that it's kind of inclusive. You can join the
Yeah.
team if you want to. Whereas once it's about race, well, those tribes are pre-assigned. Like you don't necessarily get to sign up for your team. And so I think that the class warfare thing, as much as I don't like it, was actually less toxic than the current environment.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think you put your finger on exactly why a certain meritocratic elite has become so addicted to the sort of racecraft of the moral panic around race, is because it's essentially a defense of the status quo, right? Like none of us can do anything about our race. if you hold the view that America is deeply fallen and is deeply problematic and has never escaped from its racist past and has never gotten any better, then you are essentially buying into a worldview that is so dark that nothing can really fix it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that is a defense of the status quo, and that is a defense of the economic status quo, which in my view is very problematic, but can easily be fixed, can easily be made more equitable. And so that's sort of where I come to that. I agree with you. I'm not into class warfare. I think that, working class people don't hate billionaires. They aspire to be them. And I feel very, a lot of my views now I draw as a populist from what I think of the American people like. So when I even say I'm a socialist, like even that word, working class Americans are not socialists, like they don't believe in redistribution. And it's so funny that in America we have this like it's almost a pantomime of political debate. And what I mean by that is you have one side offering trickle down economics, which maybe I see your Reagan poster, so maybe this is something you like. I think that it's sort of a bit of a hoax. And on the other hand, you have the Democrats who are offering this sort of expanded welfare state. But neither of those is a pro working class agenda. An expanded welfare state, the idea, let's say, that you would have a universal basic income, it's essentially saying we're going to pay you not to work, right? That's not saying we're going to ensure you have a job that gives you dignity and
Right.
makes you part of this nation and a fundamental part of this nation. So I feel like there's these two sides that are acting like they're fighting with each other when actually it's the elites of both sides who are fighting over which of their interests are going to be represented. And 90% of Americans just don't get a say.
Well, and the other thing that's happened is a lot of Americans have been uh, disenchanted by the media, which the mainstream media, which
Totally.
I was a CNN contributor for 5 years, so I know. Trust me, I could tell you stories. We could talk.
Well, let's hear them. Forget about me. Tell us the stories.
I just wrote a piece at my Daily Beast column where I talk a little bit about it. But I will tell you a story. I will tell you a story. Like so, as you probably know, and I'll put a pin in the question I was going to ask you. I don't want to forget that. So as you probably know, there was this whole indictment which sort of demonstrated that the Steele memo or
Yeah.
dossier
Yeah.
was some of it, a lot of it was like bogus, right? And I was going through today some of my old clips from CNN, and I was watching a clip where I was on. It was me, the host, and then a former FBI agent,
Okay.
intel agent, who was of the left.
Uh-huh.
So I am not a former intel agent. And I'm also not the host of the show. And as you know, hosts have so much power. And I went on and basically argued that, like, hey, I'm not a Trump fan, but when you've got like agents who are texting each other that they want to take him down, you've got like the guy whose wife got money from Terry McAuliffe being promoted to, like, that's problematic. And they like constantly interrupted me. And then I
Mm.
got lectured to and yelled at by the former
Oh.
agent on TV. And that was basically a pretty indicative of my experience as a, providing like a conservative alternative voice. No, look, I'm a big boy. I can handle it, but I know what's up with the media, and I guess part of the thing is that I think Trump radicalized the media, like they and the Democratic Party. They instead of sort of just being straight down the middle, they're like, we have to fight fire with fire. This
Mhm.
guy is horrible. We have to be just as bad as him.
Mhm.
And I think what happened in the process is Trump, in a way, succeeded, and he called it fake news, and they became it. They became fake news. He dared them to do it, and they did it. I mean, I'm not just
Wow.
criticizing CNN here. This is like a lot of the media in general. Anyway, you wrote the book about it. What do you think?
Well, I have a chapter describing the phenomenon you're talking about, just the way he was treated in the media and the way his followers were treated in the media. I do think the data suggests that a lot of the pressures you just identified have been at work for much longer than just Trump. So, for example, the Great Awakening is a phenomenon described by sociologists to refer to a time in around 2015, which was before Trump, when white liberal opinion began to outpace Black and Latino opinion on how far left it could get on issues of race. So there was a moment in recent history where white liberals became much more radical on race than Black and Latino Americans. And that happened before Trump. And it started, the same sociologists argue that this started with digital media. So around 2011, 2012, they've tracked how organizations like the New York Times and the Washington Post and NPR and CNN and even the Wall Street Journal have started to use woke words with just exponential frequency. So you started seeing words like white privilege, marginalization, oppression, Islamophobia, transphobia, these ideas that are, come out of an academic context, right? Just started to skyrocket in the liberal mainstream media. And so the thing you're talking about is real. It definitely amped up under Trump. They
Yeah.
definitely molded themselves as a mirror image to Trump, but the pressures had started long before. And even before that, since the 70s, I argue, and even from before that, the history of 20th century American journalism has been the history of the abandonment of the working class as journalists themselves have ascended to the elites and
Yeah.
essentially underwent a status revolution. So
Let me tell you.
everything,
Let
yeah,
me tell you a story about this. Okay.
tell me.
So my dad was a prison guard for 30 years in Western Maryland. So that's
Wow.
where I'm coming from. And I live in
Wow.
West Virginia. So that's where I'm coming from. But
Wow.
like I worked at the Daily Caller for 6 years.
Uh-huh.
That's Tucker
Uh-huh.
Carlson's,
Mm-hmm.
outfit. And so like here's an interesting story that'll like tell you all you
Tell
need to
me.
know about how the average person and young person in journalism today is not like me. So we had this story. One of the Kennedy clan, I forget which one, had bought a slave ship, and he was trying to sail it back to Boston or something. And they were going to use it was a good cause. They were going to use it to show like kids this is how horrific it was or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But the ship ran aground somewhere, and one of my readers took a picture of it and sent it to me and tried to argue that this was like an ecological disaster that the Kennedys were behind. Okay. Well, it wasn't actually a Kennedy. It was like a Kennedy who ran a foundation, and the foundation bought the slave ship. Yada yada yada. Anyway, I got finally the Kennedy guy after me making numerous calls me up, and I forget which one. It was one I forget which Kennedy it was, but he calls me up at the Daily Caller and says, "Let me tell you something. This picture's true." And everything's true except it's not an ecological problem. We lost like a gallon of oil or something. Don't worry about it. And I'm like, how do I believe you? And he said, do you know anything about yachting or boats? And I said, no, of course I don't know anything about yachting. So he said, like, well, how about does anybody at your office know? So I went out into like the bullpen of the Daily Caller and I
Uh,
said, like, does anybody out here know anything about sailing or yachting?
uh-huh.
And like 15 hands went up.
Mm,
Like, and that tells you all you need to know. Like, the average
good
person
story.
to be in journalism, you have to like move to a city and have somebody support you while you intern for free, basically, or work for $20,000 a year. And
In New York City, with New York City
yeah,
rents, that's
there you go.
100% true. That is
So I think your
100%
point,
true.
it makes perfect sense to me that journalists would be out of touch with the. But tell us a little bit about the history of how did this start? When did this start? How did it start?
Oh, it's such a good question. So, American journalism was born of a populist revolution, okay? We have such great roots. We have such amazing history. So, I start the book in 19th century New York, where this young printer called Benjamin Day, a guy who never went to high school, who was farmed out to be a printer when he was 14 years old to learn the trade by his father, who was totally broke. He comes to New York City, right? And he's like, gets a job immediately at a newspaper. And then he gets another job at a newspaper because there's a whole bunch of newspapers. But he realizes very quickly that they're all catering to the elites. There's sort of business newspapers for the business elites, economic elites, and then there's sort of political papers for the political elites. And he's like looking around him and he's like, okay, so there's like a bunch of newspapers for all of these elites, okay. But there's a lot of poor people in this city and a lot of working class people in this city. And he's like, and they all know how to read. they're all reading all this other stuff. They've got their little romance pamphlets, and they've got their religious tracts, and they get their gallows humor, and they're all buying up these pamphlets. You know, they have 2 pennies to rub together, and they're spending one of them on a they love to read. And he's like, why is there no newspaper for them? And so he starts a penny paper. He starts a newspaper that you can buy on the streets for a penny. And the guy gets rich because there are so many working class and poor New Yorkers. And like all they wanted was a newspaper that would be interesting enough to hand over one of their 2 pennies. And basically, like, he realized, like, oh, these are my people. This is who I'm writing for. Immediately, of course, the paper became, totally concerned with working class wages, with how long the workday was. But it was also like really funny. And he would have this guy go to the daybreak court, and he would sit in the daybreak court and just like take down the stories of who the police had arrested and what the crimes were. Like, basically, he was gossiping about the poor. He made them feel like they were worthy of being gossiped about. And they just, he gave them a sense of what it means to be a citizen, essentially, what it means to belong to, like, they had been invisible and he made them visible. And then they became unignorable because his became the most read newspaper in all of America. And he was followed by Joseph Pulitzer, who had very much the same idea. He didn't want to be like proselytizing on behalf of the working class. He wanted to be giving them a product for their consumption. He wanted it to be by and about and for working class Americans, and to give them dignity, the dignity of saying, you only have 2 pennies and I have something that's worth one of them. You're a consumer, you're a customer, So they created this like amazing phenomenon. And for a long time, American journalism kept that sort of working class roots. It was very much seen as a blue collar trade. For a long, long time, journalists would be living, next door to their neighbor, the cop, and they would be making a little bit more than the cop. But it wasn't like there was this class difference between them. In 1937, less than half of the elite journalists in America had a college degree. Fast forward to today, 2015 was the last time they did this study. Guess what percentage of American journalists has a college degree?
Got to be 90%.
92%.
Yeah.
Compared to just 36% of Americans. It is one of the most highly educated industries in America. If you can hold on, you'll be in the top 10% by the time you're in your early 40s. 75% of American journalists live in the coasts, in the most expensive American cities. And a 2017 study found that not only do most journalists live in blue districts, they live in the most blue districts. And I'm talking like Clinton, like plus 20, right? Like the most blue districts. So it's not surprising that they are much less religious than Americans, and much more liberal, and much more pro-choice, and all of these things that come from being totally sequestered, right, away from the way that most Americans live and where most Americans live. And they've become, essentially totally divorced from the working class of all races. And so they no longer know that, for example, even working class Black Americans who vote by and large for Democrats have conservative social views, right? This is something that journalists have completely lost sight of because they just have no contact with working class Americans anymore.
Indeed. By the way, I should note, going back to the Daily Caller story, people won't believe this. We killed the story. I put on somebody who knew about sailing, and the Kennedy guy talked them into the fact that it was not a big deal.
I'm sorry. That is class solidarity. That's exactly the point. Is like,
yes,
there is actually class solidarity between rich Republicans and rich liberals. Like, that's the dirty secret,
And in this case, I think the story deserved to be killed.
Right.
But
of course.
He got lucky that we had a lot of sailors and yachters on staff. Because otherwise I would have taken him down. So I wanted to ask you, you used the term woke is in the subtitle of your book, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure you're familiar with AOC scolding James Carville. And now there's a guy named Joel D. Anderson who writes for Slate. Did you see this yet? He tweeted, if you're not Black and started using woke pejoratively sometime post 2018 or so, or worse, don't know anything about the earlier iteration of the term, I think it's fair to consider it a racial slur. Then he continues, and it doesn't mean I'm going to do anything to you or that anyone else will, but it doesn't mean I won't either. This is a Slate writer. So you are using the term woke, I would say pejoratively. You're not black. Um, watch out, is I think the message.
It's so funny because when AOC tweeted that, I was like, this is exactly the point. Like, instead of debating the argument on the merits, it's like, oh, you're old if you say this. It's an
Yeah.
attempt to sort of shame you out of being because you're uncool, right? It's uncool to use this phrase, right? Which is that is Brahmin leftism, in such a great encapsulation. Brahmin leftism it was coined by the French economist Thomas Piketty to talk about the ways in which the left, which used to represent labor, is now totally made up of highly educated elites and represents their agenda. And the whole idea of like trying to be like something is not cool and therefore it doesn't exist or therefore you should be embarrassed, that is an aesthetic claim, right? That is a claim about being, with the cool kids. It's like, I mean, sometimes, old people notice things and
Yeah.
it's just such a funny, like,
Just,
that's not
just
even a
that
refutation.
just that silly old man who won the presidency for the first time in 16 years.
Like, I
What
don't
does
mind
he
being,
know?
or people will say to me, like, oh, these are conservative talking points. I'm like, that's not an insult to me. Like, I'm happy to be a conservative socialist if that's what you need to call me. Like, I'm not insulted by these things. I'm trying to point out something that I think is harming the most vulnerable Americans. Like, you want to call me old? Okay, I don't have a problem with that. The racist thing is kind of worse because that's an attempt to sort of really police it out of polite
Yeah.
society. It's an attempt to say, like, and the threat that you just read out, like, if he really did write that threat, I mean, that there is, right, that implicit threat, like, we're going to call you racist. And the reason they call you racist is because racists really do not deserve to be protected, right? To be part of the public sphere, because racism, and I'm saying this as Batya, racism is the worst crime you can really commit, like intellectual crime. So like, it's a way of saying you're basically, you're up for grabs. You're not worthy of being like, a citizen or whatever it is. That is, of course, what they always, my book is about the mission creep of what constitutes racist and the way that elites use that in order to police out of polite society the concerns of the working class. And I'll
Yeah.
just give you another example to come back to what you spoke about with Trump, the left and the media molding itself around him. One of the number one issues that really actually the only one I would say, Bernie is famous for having a consistent agenda, right? He's been saying the same thing for 40 years. That's what Joe Rogan praised about him. It's what everybody loves about him. There's one issue that he did a 180 flip flop on between running in 2015 and running in 2019. And that issue is immigration. So in 2015, Bernie Sanders, oh God, Batya, don't do
He said
your
it was a Koch
exactly.
brother
I'm sitting here being like,
conspiracy.
don't do your Bernie impression. Nobody wants to see your Bernie
No,
impression.
do.
No, no, I can't. I can't. No, but he did.
We'll just pretend it's you're doing Larry David doing Bernie, and then it's okay.
Well, no, Ezra Klein was like, shouldn't we support open borders? And Bernie said, no, that's a Koch brothers proposal. Like, they would like nothing more than to have people come in here, work for $2-3 an hour, and he's like, I don't believe in that. I believe in bolstering our working class and establishing a wage floor, etc. And then by 2019, he was raising his hand, and when he was asked at a debate, like, should we decriminalize illegal border crossing, which is essentially an open borders proposal, and he raised his hand and said yes, because you can't run against Donald Trump and say like, no, I'm for a strong border, right? You can't.
Yeah.
They molded themselves to fit him. And to me, immigration is such a perfect example of Brahmin leftism. So, AOC once tweeted, the whole history of citizenship in America is racist, is bound up in racism, right? They want it to be now, it's like racism, which is the worst thing on the planet, which we still do. I'm sorry, the police are still racist. They don't shoot Black people more, but they insult them more. They throw them up against cars more. They put them in handcuffs more. Even just if they insulted them more, I'm sorry, that's a moral catastrophe. A Black person in trouble knows that if they call a police, they're likely to get insulted. That is a moral emergency. That should be the top of the list. But instead of all of us being like, this is a moral emergency, they have to say, oh no, let's defund them, right? They have to take up a call that would actually hurt the very people who need us. Sorry, digression. But anyway, instead of using the word racism, keeping it where we most need to talk about it, the ways in which we've betrayed the descendants of slaves over and over and over and continue to do so, they now use it to refer to anything that doesn't fit with their policy agenda. And immigration is such a great example, because mass immigration has come at the expense of the Black American community. Like, their jobs, an increase in mass incarceration related to mass immigration. Like, and this is not me saying, there's studies that show this, a decrease in Black wages directly related to mass immigration, which is why Black Americans are not pro-immigrant in the same way that white liberals are. Who benefits from mass immigration? Affluent liberals who get domestic labor for much cheaper, who get nice bottles of wine for much cheaper, who get to go out to eat for much cheaper, right? People living in coastal cities that have all of these things on offer. People where the wife and the husband both have extremely, pressing, demanding jobs, who need a nanny and need a housekeeper and need somebody to mow the lawn, right? It is immigration is it's open borders is like just one of these ideas that affluent white liberals, that it literally lines their pockets, and they dress up any opposition to it as racism, even when it is Black Americans who are paying the price for mass immigration. And that is something you really saw, a recent shift in one generation, where the Democrats used to be the ones saying, look, you can't establish a wage floor if you don't have a national border, right? It seemed so obvious to them. And now they're on the side of saying, no, even the idea of enforcing the border is racist.
Well, and I think the thing too is that if you there's no such thing as like, well, that's a good point, but let me disagree with you.
Right, right,
You
right,
can't do that. Like,
right.
you're going to get beat up apparently by this guy who works at Slate, maybe, if you even use the word woke. But I mean, you are seen, if you disagree, you're an evil bad person, right? You're not,
Yeah.
well, Matt just disagrees, he's more conservative than I am, or he's whatever. No, it's you you are like the enemy if you don't 100% buy into our worldview.
It's so gross. It's just, I
And
mean,
it's
why?
mainstream
And it's
mainstream
bad
media people.
politics. Like, I'm sorry, you don't get people to vote for you by calling them racists for worrying about inflation, for God's sake. Like, talk about a self-own,
Yeah.
We're the side that will call you a racist if you've noticed the difference in price in milk. Like, why would the people who are supposed to be the party of the people, essentially be like, it's bigotry to be poor, essentially, is what they're saying. If you have noticed the inflation, if you voted for Glenn Youngkin because of the economy, you're a white supremacist. It's so ridiculous. Like, it's just so insulting and bad policy, and it's embarrassing, and it is so demeaning to people
Yeah.
of color who can see right through it.
But I also think what makes it worse is these are not people in the Democratic Party or people who are necessarily overtly on the left. These are sometimes people posing as like mainstream, either straight reporters or academics or just opinion leaders, commentators. I mean, they're very much
Yeah.
mixed in this incestuous world with the mainstream media. This isn't the Democratic Party, which would be bad enough. We're supposed to trust the media. And again, media means different things. As Brian Stelter pointed out to you, I hasten to add, I don't want to use a broad brush here, and I do like Brian. He's a good guy. But I think that speaks to our alienation and disconnect. We should trust the media, but they hate us in some ways, in some
But I'll
cases.
take it even one step further. You see a lot of liberal media punditry that casts like the working class as rubes who are being taken in by Fox News, for example, and told to care about this boogeyman, critical race theory that doesn't exist, right? And it's like, okay, well, what did we do to lose that viewership? What did we do to, right? Because we used to have that, like There used to be a lot of working class liberals and working class conservatives who voted for Democrats and who consumed the same media as the rest of us. And now they only watch Fox News and Newsmax. Like, that is not on them, right? They are consumers. They're supposed to go and consume the thing that is speaking to them. Now, I will be the first to admit, I don't think that conservative media is catering to the economic concerns of the working class at all. But at least they are not insulting their values while they abandon them economically, which is what the liberal media does. The sneering, the endless sneering and smearing of the working
Yeah.
classes. And it's like that. It is not their job to watch media that calls them racist, right? Like,
Yeah. I used to tell Republicans, well, I just hit something. I used to tell Republicans, like, fine, you could argue that your policies are better for Hispanics, but if Hispanics think you hate them,
right.
and now I would say the same thing about working class
Totally.
white people or any working class
Or
people for that
Latino, working
matter.
class Latino
But it's
people.
like, okay, media or okay, Democratic Party, maybe your policies or ideas would be good for them, but if they think you hate them and you're
Right.
looking down their, your nose at them, it doesn't matter that your
Totally.
policies may be good.
Yeah.
So
It's a dark
let me ask you
time.
this. So you have, I'm just observing here, uh, a very nice, affable personality,
Thank you. Oh,
but
oh.
you're also tough and you fight. And we saw that on CNN, which I think is good because you need that going into the media. Um, have you thought about this? Is this something that you had to work on to be tough? You're a nice person, but you can be tough if you have to be. Is that who you are? Do you even know this about yourself? I don't know.
As a former woke, I can still very much access those emotions. Um, and I think it's really important not to lose sight of that. And you know, I often speak like I have, and I really appreciate when people push back on me and say, like, these people aren't evil. They're just misguided, and they obviously think that they're doing the right thing, and it's really important to talk to them like they are and talk about them like they are. Like, I think a really good example of this is so you remember when Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez wore that dress to the Met Gala,
Oh
right?
yeah, tax the rich,
Tax the
something.
rich,
Yeah.
right? So she showed up at the place of like the most conspicuous consumption where only stars, can show up, right? People who've really made it in American society, who are famous or who are, part of this glitterati, right? So she had ascended, it's really the American dream, right? She had ascended to the ranks of the glitterati, and then had this sort of cheeky slogan on her dress, as though that were some sort of revolutionary act, as though it wasn't the case that every single person at this party was a liberal and loves being taxed to make themselves feel
Yeah.
better about
Yeah.
how disgustingly rich they are, right? So it was this, like, it was a perfect example of my book. In fact, I jokingly said if she had done that before I wrote my book, I wouldn't have had to write it, because it was such a perfect encapsulation of how, like, this sort of woke, like, culture, it's all slogans. Like, it thinks that it's social justice when actually it's conspicuous consumption, right? It was like such a perfect embodiment of that. But then 2 days later, right? So she got like blasted for this, both by the right wingers who blast her no matter what she does, and by some on the left, like myself, who care a lot about class and a lot about inequality. And 2 days later, this video came out. Did you watch it? That she had
Mm-mm.
filmed while getting ready for the gala with Vogue. And the video was really heartbreaking because you could see that she had no clue what was coming. First of all, she had no clue that her own side would have any problems with, what she was doing. It was so clear that she truly believed that this was a revolutionary act. Like, and her wide-eyed belief in that, and her inability to step outside of that for 1 second and realize that it would be seen as a symbol of exactly the opposite. Like, it really broke my heart, because you could see right into her soul almost in this, because she was so earnest in these preparations for this event that was just going to go so poorly. And I think that was really important for me to see that and to remember, like, that's what's in her heart, is like
Wait,
this
so
true. Yeah.
you're saying she thought she was speaking truth to power and that
Yes.
she thought there would be pushback instead of her being celebrated. She gets see. My take is she
Yeah.
got to have her cake and eat it too. I mean, she got to like play Cinderella or whatever, like go to this fancy thing and be, but also be celebrated for looking awesome, but get to say she's sticking it to the man. So she's actually, speaking truth to power, and she's going to generate criticism, which gives her more attention. It was a win-win-win, I think. But you're saying she really thought that there would be that it was a brave move.
I think she really did. I think she really felt like she was going to be going the way it was from the video. Okay, obviously I'm projecting all of this because she didn't like literally say this in the video, but from my takeaway from the Vogue video was that she was imagining, the Met Gala as a place teeming with, Republican like fat cats with like long cigars who'd be like, "Whoa, what's she doing here? Tax the rich? No, we would never do that. Oh, what are the like as opposed to it being filled with people like Anna Wintour, who I'm sure is happy to pay a higher, tax bracket because she makes so much money. Like what is the difference anyway, right? Like that's the kind of that's the liberal, point of view right now. And I felt like it was like I think she thought it was going to be this like truly revolutionary act, like, getting something on the agenda. And it seemed to me like her response afterwards, she got very defensive about the criticism, which to me signaled that she did quite then later see how it was seen by others, even on her own side. And so just to finish the point I was trying to make, it's that like I think it's so important to remember like everybody, Yuval Levin says this, when people show up to Washington, it would be so much easier if people were showing up being like, heh 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 heh, I'm gonna get power and money and screw over the little guy. They don't. Everyone shows up and says, I'm gonna make the world a better place. And I think if you can keep that in mind, you even when you're criticizing people, like you have a much better chance of influencing them.
I think that's true. So you were on CNN's Reliable Sources yesterday, as we're taping this on a Monday, with
Yes.
Brian Stelter, um, and you did great. And I saw
Thank
it
you.
because Barry Weiss tweeted it, and it got a lot of Twitter buzz. And then I watched you, and I'm like, wow. And actually, my wife, like independently, was like, you got to invite her on the podcast. And I'm like, I've already emailed her. Um, so so that's how much it spread. So, um, I'd love to know, like what kind of feedback you've gotten, and also, your kind of your strategy for going in there and doing so well.
um my strategy. I listened to a lot of his podcast episodes, a lot of his interviews. I try to prepare for each interview. Especially when I, know I'm going in with somebody who I disagree with. Like it's nice to be able to think about where I agree and where I disagree, because I'm a big believer in hostage negotiation. Like I think all of our opinions we're sort of held hostage by our fears. That's where our opinions come from. And there's an FBI manual on hostage negotiation that has really good strategies about how to do it effectively. And so I try to. And one of the main things is like if you can find common ground with somebody, honestly, that's really what I care about. Like I'm one of these like realignment people. Like I want
Yeah.
populists from the left and the right to overcome their differences and take back this country from the elites. So I really feel like finding common ground with people is really important. And I thought it was I had been watching CNN all week. I watch Fox and CNN all day. I have two screens up because I'm an opinion editor. It's not like just because I feel like it, but like it's part of my job. And I had been watching CNN, and I felt like they really got what happened in Virginia, and it seemed to me like they were trying very hard to course correct. So I felt like, oh, I could be part of this. Like I could be. Maybe that's why they invited me on, because
Wow.
So I felt pretty, yeah.
That's great. So speaking of the realignment, it does strike me that there is an interesting, almost like fourth wave neoconservatism going on.
Hmm.
And, for a
Hmm.
while now, we've had people like Mickey Kaus, my former colleague at the Daily Caller, Mickey Kaus, who I think used to be at Slate, who is a populist, who is an immigration restrictionist, but more recently, the I guess the anti woke for with apologies, with the fear of getting my ass kicked. The anti woke movement now, I guess, incorporates everyone from you know uh, the Green Bay Packers quarterback to to Dave Chappelle, to Joe Rogan, to Matt Taibbi, to Andrew Sullivan, to Matthew Iglesias, to Barry Weiss, and maybe now you. Although you might not like that, um, but it does feel like there's a time of a realignment, and maybe the left versus right paradigm is doesn't exactly hold up anymore. What do you think?
Well, I'm much more concerned with economic stuff than culture stuff. So I'll tell you where I'm seeing it. So Josh Hawley giving a talk, um, calling for, and a bill. He wrote a bill calling for 50% of every product that is distributed in America to be produced in America. Meaning, you know, you want to import N95s from China, you have to prove to the government that 50% of them of what you're selling was made in America. I think that's great. But you cannot imagine a single Democrat putting forward such a
Yeah.
populist economic agenda, and I think so. That's where I'm seeing it. Like hearing Marco Rubio talking about, he calls it common good capitalism, which is, you know, another way of saying socialism in my book. So I think that's great. And honestly, even with Trump, like Trump's economic agenda was extremely protectionist in nature, calling for a lot of the stuff that Bernie Sanders used to agitate for, like getting rid of NAFTA, which Trump did, trade war with China, tariffs. Like this is stuff that used to be considered socialist that nobody in the Democratic Party had the guts to put forward, and that Trump really did. And it was sort of disappointing, although obviously understandable, that there wasn't anybody on the left who was like, look, this guy's putting money in the pockets of poor Americans of all races. Like, yeah, he's gross. Like, yeah, he can't keep his mouth shut. Yeah, he's like really undignified. He loves to brawl on Twitter, but just like put that aside for a minute. The bottom 25% of Americans saw a 4.5% wage increase in 2019. Like, when is the last time that happened? Man released 5,000 black men from prison. Can't read about that anywhere, like, so that was very disappointing to me. Was like, obviously, like, I have a lot of criticism of Donald Trump. I didn't vote for him, but there was a lot there for a lefty and a populist to really like.
I think
And
a, I think a
yeah,
lot of what happens nowadays is like first mover advantage. Like whoever
huh,
does something in politics, the other side will reflexively do 180 degree
totally,
because they want the contrast to be
totally,
stark. And the problem there is it allows whoever moves first to define and to
totally. That's
corner the
so
market.
smart.
I actually think it's a
It's
mistake.
so
If
true.
the first move is a good move, maybe hug him on that instead of the
Totally.
contrast.
No, that's really smart and really well put.
Thank you. Let me ask you, when you go on cable news or whatever, you don't have as much time as we've had here. So I love this format, this venue. If you're out there and you love this, you can go to patreon.com/Matt Lewis and be capitalistic and help the common good out and help us keep doing these conversations. Was there anything that you think is an important point that is not understood that you haven't had a chance to sort of delve into during these discussions?
That's such a lovely question. Thank you. Um, I guess I would say, um, well, something that I would really like to hear more liberals and lefties talking about, in addition to economic populism, is something I don't really understand why more people aren't upset about in the way that I was. So like I always think back to when I started to become less woke, and I can trace it back to learning about this Yale study from 2018. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It found that there's a difference in how white liberals and white conservatives talk to Black and Latino people. Do you know
Hmm.
this study?
No.
I shouldn't tell you because this is going to be fodder for a conservative, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway because if any of your liberal viewers know why liberals don't talk about this more, I would really like to know because it was really eye opening to me. So the study found that white liberals dumb down their language when they talk to black and brown people. They use smaller syllable words, and white conservatives don't. And I remember reading that and thinking, and we call them the racists. Like, that's messed up.
That's
And
interesting.
it's really interesting, right? Because again, it's like so clear that white liberals do this out of a sense of empathy. Like, clearly, I don't want to embarrass this person by using a big word. They probably won't understand it. But it's so freaking racist to assume that about somebody based on the color of their skin. And it's so crazy that conservatives don't do that. And I remember thinking, like, it wasn't like the scales fell from my eyes immediately, but I remember being like, file that away because there's an important lesson there. And I don't know what to make of that, but
Yeah.
there's a sickness in a worldview that produces that in the name of justice, right?
Yeah. The other thing too, and it strikes me, I think you were onto something. You were talking about it didn't start with Trump. It seems to be that social media and Twitter are a big
Totally.
part of when this really started. But when I was growing up, it betrays my age, but liberalism used to be about like, hey man, it's all about tolerance, and it's just a different idea, man. Like we've all got different ideas, and that's cool. And like, at least that was, I mean, it may not have been true, but that was the perception that liberals were open minded and like anything goes and like let your freak flag fly, and that conservatives were like narrow minded and um dogmatic, and that's really flipped now, I
Totally.
think. And
Totally.
what's your take on how that happened?
It's so weird to see the conservatives who used to be like, you should go to jail for blasphemy, right? Being now on the side of like free speech and let's hear from everybody and, just chill out. And the liberals who used to be like, no, you have to be able to say the C word and the F word on network television during children's hour now are the side that's like, no, like, you should lose your job if you make a joke that, comes off wrong or that doesn't sound right or whatever. It is so interesting. It's not the only area. So, the left used to be the side of postmodernism. Like everybody has their narrative, right? And the right was like, no, there's one story to tell. There's one, and today the left is like, there's one story you tell, it's the 1619 project and that's it. Anything else is racist. And it's the right who's saying like, oh no, everybody has their narrative. Like what is truth anyway? Like, or like, for example, the science, right? The left used to be the Foucault like model, right? Like Foucault, who was like, the state is going to try to take over your body. You must resist, right? Like, science itself is a construct, right? Now it's the right that's saying science can be fallible. The scientific method is a way of disproving things, not proving them. Show us more proof, blah, blah, blah. And it's the left who's saying, no, science is completely godly. It comes down perfect from the words of Anthony Fauci. And if you don't follow it, you're a moral pervert and you're going to die, right? It's just so interesting. Oh, and the left saying the state should have the power to put things in your body, like, so there's been a shift on so many of these things. It's a very interesting time.
It really is. And I'm so glad that you would help us get, sort of try to figure it out a little bit as best we can. I mean, obviously people should, number one, they should go get the book, but additionally, how can they follow you on Twitter and read you?
You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Bungar-Sargon. I am one of 4 opinion editors at Newsweek. We publish from across the political spectrum. It's maybe one of the last places where you'll find somebody defending abortion side by side with somebody opposing it completely. I try my best to elevate the voices of working class Americans, to really give them a platform at Newsweek when they've been deplatformed from so many other publications. So definitely check out Newsweek. We're doing great work. I'm really proud of it and proud to work there. And thank you so much for having me, Matt. This was really fun.
I'm so glad we got to meet
Me
and
too.
talk. Tell us, everyone get the book. It's out right now.
Yeah,
Tell us
get
the
the
name of the
book.
book and how they can get it.
The book is called Bad News: How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy. And you can get it at Amazon or at encounterbooks.com. That's between you and your God, where you buy your books. And yeah, I would be thrilled if you check it out. And if you want to write to me and tell me what you think about it, you can reach me at b.ungar-sargon at newsweek.com. I would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Batya Ungar-Sargon, thank you for coming on the news.
Thanks, Matt.